We start out with a quarter. Good wolf. Again, this is one that I don't think the wolf played very well, and the wolf bet half pot. So again, doing good things. Subscribe now to a front row seat for expert hand analysis and world-class cash game strategy. Okay, maxing value with ace king. Here we go. So we start out with ace king. I know that's a big surprise. We have the ace king of clubs in the big blind. The cutoff opens. We 3-bet to $110. The cutoff goes ahead and makes the call. We flop pretty good. So flop is ace of diamonds, ace of spades, 7 of diamonds. So we flop trips with the best kicker possible. There's 225 in the pot. The villain has $903 behind. We will start here on the flop. John, what do you prefer?
Pretty standard c-bet strategy for me on most paired boards. Definitely on ace-ace-x paired boards, I'm going to be starting out with a small size, probably a c-bet somewhere in between a quarter or a third pot. I think that's completely what I would expect to see a wolf do in this spot. I think we can immediately start getting value from lots of strong hands. Obviously, they're not going to fold an ace, I think, versus third or quarter. They're almost never folding any pocket pair that peels the 3-bet pre-flop, obviously not folding a flush draw or a 7. And I think a third starts really allowing you to get some value from some really weak hands. So some hands with like backdoor spades, hands with like backdoor straight draws. I think like some of the really nice hands that are just kind of crushed by our exact hand here are hands like, 8-9 of spades or queen 10 of spades, something like that. So yeah, I think I would just start out with a third here, not really think about having too many other c-bet sizes. I think that would just make my overall strategy really hard to execute. And I also, we have ace king in this spot, but I also do want to be able to value bet hands that are not as strong as ace king. And I think starting out with a small size allows me to do that.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. So we start out with a quarter. Good wolf. Villain calls. The turn is the 10 of hearts. And so now the board is ace, ace, 10, 7. There's 358 in the pot. So there's 2 bets remaining. Now, what do you think you would prefer to do after betting quarter and getting called on the flop?
This turn, I think we can start having a little bit more flexibility in strategy. And I guess the first thing is like to decide whether or not we want to keep betting. Obvious reasons for continuing to bet is that we're just going to continue extracting value from worse ace x diamond draws. Maybe now they have a whole bunch of combo draws to go along with their flush draw hands like king queen of diamonds, queen jack of diamonds, 8-9 of diamonds. None of those hands are folding flop. You could also just have like turn a whole bunch of draws with backdoor spades too, given how small we bet on the flop. So we talked about getting called by king queen of spades or 8-9 of spades types hands when we bet so small on the flop. I think the argument for checking here is that a lot of those ace x hands might just start stacking themselves. That wouldn't be shocking at all. And we might just be able to start picking off bluffs from the same hands that picked up equity. So I think it's pretty close between checking and betting here. The other nice thing too, that really allows us to check here, I think, is that we can. It's not unreasonable to just overbet jam the river for roughly 2x pot. That's like this is like a line that you see somewhat regularly, especially at 1K&L, bet, check, bet, and just overbet jam the river with a polarized range once you check the turn. I think your checking range is going to be perceived to have, a whole bunch of traps like this, and then also just hands that were c-betting the flop, like our own backdoor spade hands that were c-betting the flop with the turn and now are jamming the river to kind of balance out some of these really, really strong hands that jam the river. What do you think about this spot? Are you more inclined to bet or more inclined to check?
I'm way more inclined to check than bet. And I really like the way that the wolf plays this hand. I think the next hand I'm not gonna like it as much as this one. And the reasons are connected. And then the third hand I think is also connected to the first two, but in a different way. So like this one, I really like checking the turn because you kind of alluded to it that ace x can stack itself when we check the turn. So they have, ace jack, ace queen, even ace deuce, 3, ace 4, ace 5. those hands can feel pretty comfortable betting turn, jamming river to target kings, queens, and jacks, and maybe like some kind of 10x in our bluff catching region. So because I think ace X is probably going to stack itself when we check, and I also think that like we're probably not letting villain realize a ton of equity when we go ahead and check the turn, because I think a lot of their draws will bet themselves. And the hands that will check behind are hands like, 7x, pocket eights, pocket nines, maybe like, jack 10 of spades or some sort of like 10x that they, with the back door that they peeled the flop with, something like that. So those hands are drawing, either dead or very close to dead. So those hands getting a chance to realize extra equity, I'm not super concerned about. So yeah, like I'm much more on team check in this situation than team bet. And that
Gotcha.
is what the wolf in question does. Villain bets a third, and this is, pretty much an expected size, I believe, from the villain. They bet a third here, which is really good news. It kind of signals that, they can have ace X, and they can also have, some draws or some air balls. I think the bluff catcher region generally, pocket eights, pocket nines, 7x, 10x checks behind. And so villain is, starting to polarize here, which is really good when we have a nutted hand like ace king.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting spots where like villain is polarizing with a small size,
Yep.
and that's like, it's kind of unique to this situation. Also, sort of unique to the SPR, I guess, where like again they can still bet lots of very strong hands for this size and comfortably jam the river, just given the SPR. So yeah,
Yeah, our hand gives us a lot of flexibility, but they have a lot of flexibility as well as far as sizing selection and decision to bet turn or bet river, etc. So they bet, and we call. The river's the five of clubs. There's
one second.
yeah,
Any thought about check raising the turn versus the range that you just?
no,
And if not, why not?
because like I definitely want them to have queen jack of spades in their range so that they can jam when they brick,
Mhm.
and they're basically they are drawing dead with a hand like queen jack. So like I want to leave the bottom end of their polar range in their range, so I'm not going to be raising the turn here.
Right. The top end we almost always stack no matter what we
Or
do.
they
So
stack us,
just want
right?
them.
Like I mean,
Right.
if they
Right.
have ace 10 they stack us, if they have 10s full they stack us. So like the top end is kind of locked in place as to like what's going to happen. The bottom end I would like them to put a lot more money into the pot. That would
Gotcha.
be my primary goal. So
Mhm.
the river is the five of clubs. We check. Villain overbet jam 716 into 600. Happy day. We hope. We call. And villain ends up having the queen jack of diamonds. So they flopped a flush draw. They turned a gut shot with their flush draw and ended up putting all the money in. And, this is one of the hands that probably calls a check raise, but then folds to river jam when we jam the river.
Mhm.
And again, like queen jack of spades, those types of hands definitely just going to fold the turn. And if they're bluffing queen jack of diamonds, they're probably bluffing queen jack of spades. So yeah, really happy with the way that our 1K and L Wolf played this.
I think that for lower stakes players and recreational players, that not check raising the turn is, I would say, should be like the biggest takeaway of this hand, because I hear so many kind of lower stakes players or newer poker players just say like, well, there's like a flush draw, or like they could have a gut shot on the turn and I need to like protect versus like the flush draws or gut shots and stuff like that when, when you have a value hand. And like what that often ends up um resulting in is just like never getting to stack their airball, their like low ball, their low equity hands like this on the river. Because like you said, they call the check raise, but they're definitely not calling the jam on the river.
Yeah.
And so like really all you're doing is either getting coolered by the hands that you're getting stacked by, or coolering the hands that you would have coolered anyway. So yeah, it really is important to like not like not be basing your strategy out of fear of like your opponent getting there or something like that, and allowing them to, bluff jam the river with queen high.
Well, I think it's essentially having a strategy, right? I think like
Okay, yeah.
taking an action that's outside of a strategy is essentially what's happening there due to some kind of pressure that you feel internally. That is pretty much what's happening. And anytime you start existing outside of a strategy, you start taking actions that are outside of a strategy for some kind of like one-off, I think only bad things happen in the long run.
Right.
So hand number two, again, this is one that I don't think the Wolf played very well. So this is 500 no limit, open to $12.5 from the cutoff. We 3-bet ace king from the small blind, and the cutoff calls. Here, the flop is ace king 5. So once again, we flop pretty good. 115 in the pot. Villain has 464. They're the effective stack. And yeah, we'll start with, your flop decision here with top two pair.
I think this is a flop texture where I would likely start out with a larger C bet than the 1/3 or quarter size that we saw on the other board texture. Here, I think that we just have a much wider range of hands that we can target immediately. Just start targeting for value on the flop and the turn. For instance, just having only two aces being out there gives villain many more ace X to call flop and turn, many more ace X to call, a large bet on the flop. I also think that on a paired board, villains are going to be more likely to peel with a backdoor flush draw type hands that might not peel on a paired board facing a big size. So like, a hand like 9-10 of clubs might peel half pot here, but might not peel like the 9-10 of spades in the previous hand might not peel on an ace X board. Again, there's also a whole smattering of gut shots that we can target here with half pot that just didn't exist on the other board texture. So I would go with like a larger C bet size here, maybe something closer to half pot.
Nice. And the Wolf in question does just that. They bet half. So they're being trained well. The cutoff calls half pot. There's 227 in the pot. Effective stack is now 408. Turn is even better than the flop. It's the ace of hearts. So now hero has the nuts. And so we are at, once again, a turn decision that is pretty similar to the last hand, right? Like the setup is very, very, very close to the last hand where the board is ace, ace, king 5. Hero has a very, very strong hand. And in this situation, villain has, them over realizing equity can only be good for us.
Absolutely.
So
sounds like you're on team check again on the turn here.
I'm definitely on team check for a lot of the reasons that I said, in the first hand. Like, let's let their low equity hands bet. Let's let their ace X stack itself and just maximize value from the entirety of their range instead of betting and like forcing them to call down and have an ace, right? Which I think is what happens when you start betting. So Wolf in this situation ended up betting half pot, which I don't like. I'm not a big fan of. Our villain calls rivers the 7 of spades, and the Wolf is going to do something that I don't like. Once again, they jam the river, and the cutoff does pay them off because they have the ace jack of diamonds, right? They have a hand that would have stacked itself had we checked the turn or checked the river probably as well. And if villain has queen jack of diamonds, jack 10 of diamonds, queen 10 of diamonds, queen jack of clubs, queen 10 of clubs, jack 10 of clubs, they never get stacked here. They just they just fold the turn or call the turn and fold the river. So like the first hand, I think the Wolf played exceptionally well. This hand, not a big fan, but same concepts in play. I much would have rather the villain had, queen jack of diamonds here just to like really drive the point home, but it's certainly a part of their range. And we got really fortunate here that villain actually had trips in order to pay off the turn in the river.
Yeah. I think one of the themes that's kind of emerging from at least these two hands is that, or one of the heuristics that's emerging from these two hands is, hey, like if the range that you're targeting for value or their bluff catching range that you're targeting for value with a hand like ace king here just almost always bets itself on the turn in the river, you should highly consider checking, just because now all you're doing is, again, stacking hands that are going to put all the money in themselves. So you're missing all you're doing is missing out on value from the hands that wouldn't call a bet, like the queen jack of diamonds, like you mentioned.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that perfectly sets up hand number 3. And by the way, if you haven't yet, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment as well if you enjoy the first 2 hands here on Tactical Tuesday. Hand number 3, gonna tie things together. So the cutoff opens to $11.50. So just a little bit smaller open. Hero, 3 bets to 11 big blinds, $55. Villain calls, and the effective stack is 450 with 115 in the pot. The flop is ace 5-4, rainbow. So we'll start here. What is your sizing preference on ace 5-4 rainbow?
Uh, Likely just going to be starting out with another half pot here. I think this board is dynamic enough. It's I think the cutoff, because of kind of like the 4-5 interaction, can actually have quite a few straight draws on this board. I assume they are always peeling hands like 6-7 suited and 7-8 suited. Obviously they can have all the ace x in their range, and I think half pot is also going to get called by a ton of mid pocket pairs and maybe even some backdoor flush draw type hands.
And the wolf bet half pot. So again, doing good things. Turn is the king of hearts. So now we have a situation, a full rainbow board, where hero has top 2 pair, 226 in the pot. Villain has 394 behind. What do you think of this turn setup?
Man, I almost feel like a broken record, but I really want to let some of their, hands that were just crushing start value betting themselves. I assume like a hand like ace queen again is, ace queen, ace jack might just stack themselves if we check this turn, or at least put in a bet on the turn. If they don't, then again we have the opportunity to just overbet, value jam the river. And
What do you do after you check and ace jack bets a third on the turn? Or ace 10?
That's a good question. You're right. Maybe a hand like ace 10 just bets a turn and does a lot of checking back on the river. Yeah, maybe scratch that. Maybe their ace x is not exactly the range that their weaker ace x is not the range that we're targeting, but the range that you could target with a check on the turn again is just like their 6-7, 7-8s, jack 10 of clubs, queen jack of clubs, jack 10 of diamonds, queen jack of diamonds, like those types of hands. I still think that there are more hands that we can target with a check than we can with just a bet here. So
yeah, I go the opposite direction. Actually, I think here I'm on board with betting the turn when I'm not 100% confident that ace queen and ace jack does bet the turn and jam the river. I am really confident that ace 10 doesn't bet the turn and jam the river. I don't think ace 10 will bet small on the turn and call a check raise and a river jam. So it's really difficult to target their weak ace x by checking. And so because in this situation, unlike the last couple, there were 2 aces on the board. So villains like ace 10 was trips. And if the board was ace ace, then I would feel like really good about checking. But here, I would actually rather just go ahead and bet jam. I think, there are 8 combos of like 6-7, 7-8 that may fold the turn and may bluff the turn and river. I'm not sure. It's also possible 6-7 could just check behind so that they can realize their equity and never get check raised on this board. 7-8's probably a little bit more likely to bet. But yeah, I think for me, it's really difficult to navigate the turn and river once we check and villain bets like a third, and there's no guarantee that like top pair weak kicker is going to be jamming river for value. They honestly just shouldn't. So in this spot, I would rather just bet, target top pair weak kicker, and leave it there.
Yeah. So like what you're saying here is like counter to the first 2 hands, their bluff catching ranger often does not put the money in themselves because ace 10, ace jack, ace queen might not, well, ace 10 specifically might not jam the river, or likely doesn't jam the river. Whereas in the other hands, almost all the ace x's are expected to just put all the money in by the river. And here that's not the case because there's only 1 ace. And yeah, I think you're right. There are a lot of ace x's below ace 10 that aren't going to, if ace 10 is not stacking themselves, then ace 9, ace 8, ace 7, ace 6, ace deuce, ace 3, none of those hands are going to do this, stack themselves as well. So you're saying just go after their bluff catchers in this range. And
yeah, maybe they turn like king queen or king jack or something, right? Like some kind of backdoor turn second pair, and you can really put a lot of pressure on that.
If they can have jack 10 of diamonds, they can have king jack of diamonds and king queen of diamonds.
So hero bets half pot. And again, I don't think it's like given that like queen jack, queen 10, jack 10 just fold to this turn bet, by the way. I think like there's a very real possibility that they peel this turn bet. In position player calls, we river a king. So we once again have essentially the nuts. I guess there's one combo of aces that beats us, but we have essentially the nuts. Ace, king, king, 4-5. Villain has 283 behind. There's 448 in the pot. And I think here, based on the line that the wolf took, based on everything that we said on the turn, I think it's just pretty much a no-brainer to not try to target their bluff region and instead target their ace X region and the bluff catcher region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hero jams, villain calls, and they do have ace queen of spades, so we do get all the money with ace versus ace queen of spades. I think it's possible that ace queen goes ahead and bets the turn and jams the river themselves, but I don't think they're going to do it every time. Like, I don't think it's like an actual lock, especially once the king pairs. And now we have like potentially king queen, king jack, king 10 in our range. You know, they're essentially targeting ace jack, ace 10. They do beat ace 5 and ace 4 once the king pairs, so maybe that's extra incentive for them to jam. But yeah, just making sure that we stack ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, and as well as the other ace X, I think is like the real takeaway. And so with that said, that's going to be everything that I got for this week's episode on maxing value with ace king. Again, if you enjoyed what you watched and you're looking forward to more episodes each and every single week, click the subscribe and like button. If you have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. That's all I got for this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
Yeah, good job, Wolves. See you next week.
See you next week. Your feedback drives our content, so drop a comment down below and let us know what you'd like to see next.
This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and John Chai. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.